There's something almost nobody wants to admit when it comes to money. You're not just losing money when you make a bad decision. Sometimes you lose money precisely when you're absolutely sure you're doing the right thing. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because it doesn't feel like a mistake, it doesn't feel impulsive, it doesn't feel out of control. It feels smart, responsible, even financially disciplined. The problem is that some of the most intelligent everyday decisions are exactly the ones that drain your money the most over time. And the scariest part is that it doesn't happen in an obvious way. There's no single moment where you realize you got it wrong. You only notice it later when it's too late to undo it. And when that starts to become clear, one question completely changes the game. How much of your money is being lost while you think you're saving it? Because what you're about to see in this video isn't typical money saving advice. You're going to see 5 behavior patterns that look smart at the moment you make them, but in reality, do the exact opposite of what they promise. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to actually recognize them in real life and adjust the way you make decisions in a simple, practical, and intentional way. If you want to understand how to make better financial decisions without falling into these silent traps, subscribe to the channel, because from this point on, the way you save money will probably never be the same. One of the best feelings when it comes to money is believing you just saved some. You find a lower price. You wait for a discount, you choose the cheaper option, and almost automatically, it feels like you made a smart financial decision. That feeling is so common that most of us never stop to question it. After all, spending less should always be good for your finances, right? But what if some of the financial decisions that make you feel the smartest are actually the very ones that quietly cost you the most? It sounds contradictory, because saving money and losing money don't seem like they belong in the same sentence. But more often than you might think, they do. And the reason is surprisingly simple. Feeling like you saved money doesn't always mean you made a good decision. Sometimes those two things go hand in hand. Sometimes they move in completely opposite directions. The difficult part is that you almost never notice the difference when you're making the decision, because we naturally pay attention to what happens right away. You see the lower price, the smaller payment, the money that stayed in your pocket today. What you usually don't see is everything that decision may quietly set in motion over the months and years that follow. And that's exactly where this entire conversation begins. Because some financial choices seem incredibly responsible in the present, while slowly becoming expensive in ways that are almost impossible to notice. The strange part is that these decisions rarely feel like mistakes. In fact, they usually make you feel disciplined, careful, even financially responsible. And that's exactly why millions of people keep repeating these choices without ever questioning whether they're actually helping. And before we understand why so many people end up paying more while trying to save money, there's a much bigger question we need to answer first. Why are decisions that seem so obviously smart capable of misleading so many people at the same time? The truth is, there's a very specific reason why so many people fall into this trap, and it has nothing to do with a lack of intelligence. The real reason is that our brains are wired to evaluate decisions very differently from the way money actually works. Whenever we experience an immediate benefit, we naturally feel like we made a good decision. That's why finding a discount, for example, feels so satisfying. Paying less than we expected feels like a win. And walking out of a store believing we saved money gives us the feeling that we made a financially smart choice. The problem is that our brains usually stop evaluating the decision right there. They see the immediate benefit and assume the entire decision was a good one. But money rarely tells its full story on the day you make a purchase. Some financial decisions seem excellent during the first few hours. Others continue to look like great decisions for weeks, but their real cost may not show up until much later. And when that happens, almost nobody connects it back to the original decision, because the purchase is already in the past. The discount has already been celebrated. The feeling of having saved money has already faded. And that's exactly why so many people confuse saving money with making a smart financial decision, when in reality, those are two very different things. A good financial decision isn't the one that looks cheaper today. It's the one that costs you less by the time the whole story is over. And that small distinction completely changes the way we begin to think about money, because suddenly the question is no longer, how much did I save today? It becomes, how much is this decision really going to cost me over time? That's exactly where many of the most popular money-saving strategies begin to reveal a side that almost nobody notices. They seem smart at the moment you make them, but they always manage to hide the real costs they can create. What fascinates me the most is that millions of people keep repeating these decisions every single day, convinced they're managing their money better. And to make sure you don't fall into that trap anymore, I'm going to show you some of the most common ways people try to save money that seem incredibly smart in the moment, but end up costing far more than most people ever imagine. And once you see the hidden costs behind them, there's a good chance you'll never look at these money-saving decisions decisions the same way again. One of the most common examples happens during sales. Imagine you walk into a store intending to buy just one thing. As you're walking through the aisles, you notice a product that's 50% off. At that moment, your attention shifts away from necessity. It shifts to opportunity. You start thinking it would be a waste to let that deal pass you by. So you put the product in your cart. You leave the store feeling satisfied, convinced you just saved a good amount of money. But there's one question that almost nobody asks once they get home. If that product had been full price, would you have bought it anyway? Because if the answer is no, something interesting happened. You didn't save 50%. You spent 50% of money that never would have left your bank account in the first place. The discount lowered the price, but it was also the reason the purchase happened. Without that sale, the money would have most likely stayed exactly where it was. And this happens far more often than we realize. Many companies don't run sales simply to sell products at lower prices. They run sales to convince people to buy things that were never part of their original plan. And when that happens, the discount stops being a saving. It becomes a trigger for spending. But there's an even more convincing version of that same trap. It happens when the saving is no longer in the discount, but in the quantity. You see an offer saying that if you buy 3, each one costs much less, or you notice that a much larger package significantly lowers the cost per unit. At that moment, everything seems to make perfect sense. After all, mathematically, each item really is cheaper. There's just one small detail that almost nobody considers. You don't consume mathematics. You consume what you can actually use. If part of that purchase ends up forgotten in the pantry, expires, goes bad, or simply never gets used, then the money spent on that portion was wasted too. At the end of the day, you paid less per unit, but you spent more money overall. Do you see how these two situations tell exactly the same story? In both cases, all your attention is focused on the price, while the most important question is almost never asked. Did I really need to spend this money? Because a saving is only a good saving when it keeps money in your account that would have been better left there. Everything else can simply be a very clever way of convincing you to spend more. But there's an even more dangerous way to save money. Because with this one, the loss doesn't show up on the day you make the purchase. It shows up months or even years later. And that's exactly why so many people never realize they've fallen into the trap. This kind of saving is extremely common, and it seems perfectly reasonable at the time. In fact, almost everyone does exactly the same thing. When they're about to buy something expensive, the first thing they do is compare prices. They open several websites, compare different stores, look for coupons, wait for a sale, and when they finally find the lowest price, they feel like they've made a great financial decision. At first glance, this seems exactly like the behavior of someone who's financially responsible. But there's a much more important question that almost nobody asks. How much is this product going to keep costing me after I bring it home? Because in many cases, the purchase price is only the beginning of the story. Imagine someone shopping for a printer. After spending a few days comparing prices, they find a very inexpensive model. It looks like a fantastic deal. Only a few months later, they discover that every set of replacement ink cartridges costs almost as much as buying a brand new printer. The printer was cheap, but continuing to use it never was. The same thing happens with cars. Many people spend weeks trying to save a few $1,000s on the purchase price, but they don't spend even a few minutes researching how much they'll pay for insurance, replacement parts, fuel, and depreciation. In the end, they save money upfront, then spend years paying far more in ownership costs. The same pattern shows up with appliances, equipment, tools, and just about any product that will remain part of your daily life. Some products only seem inexpensive because they hide a large portion of their cost until later, and that completely changes the way a purchase should be evaluated. Financially smart people don't just ask, how much does it cost to buy this? They ask, how much will it cost to keep this running for as long as I own it? That small shift in perspective prevents losses that almost never appear on the day of the purchase, because money rarely disappears all at once. It usually leaves little by little, in small amounts that seem harmless. Until a few years later, the cost of owning that product far exceeds the money you thought you had saved in the beginning. That's why saving money doesn't simply mean paying less today. It means spending less over the entire lifetime of that decision. And there's another choice that's even more dangerous, because this time you really do pay less, but you do it by taking on a risk that could cost you dozens of times more in the future. This is a decision that can seem even smarter than all the previous ones, because for a long time, this way of saving money can actually seem like it's working. You pay less, nothing happens. The months go by, sometimes even years, and that makes it feel like you made the perfect decision. The problem is that this kind of saving depends on one very specific condition to keep working. It depends on absolutely nothing going wrong. Think about someone who chooses a much cheaper insurance policy simply because the monthly payment is lower, or someone who hires the cheapest service available without looking into the quality of the work, or someone who decides to save money on the very things that are meant to protect them when problems arise. As long as everything goes well, the decision seems like a great one. After all, the money stayed in your account. But that calculation changes completely the moment something unexpected happens. An accident, a piece of equipment that breaks shortly after a poorly done repair, a problem that could have been fixed properly the first time, but now costs several times more to correct. And suddenly, all the money you thought you had saved disappears in a single day. That's exactly why some decisions should never be evaluated based only on price. Because some expenses are not meant to provide an immediate benefit. They're meant to reduce risk. When you choose only the cheapest option, you're often not eliminating a cost. You're simply accepting a greater risk. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Some forms of saving don't make the problem disappear. They simply push that cost to another moment. And very often, that moment arrives precisely when you're least prepared to deal with it. That's what makes this kind of decision so dangerous. For a long time, it seems to confirm that you made the right choice, until one single event completely changes that perception. At the end of the day, saving money also means managing risk. Not every expense exists because someone wants to take money out of your pocket. Some expenses exist precisely to prevent a much bigger loss in the future. People who focus only on the lowest price usually ignore how much that decision could end up costing them later. And there's one last way of saving money that may be the quietest of them all, because it usually starts with the good intention of handling everything yourself, but almost always ends up costing far more. This last type of saving I'm going to show you often seems incredibly responsible, because this time you're not even buying anything. You simply decide to handle everything yourself. Whenever a problem comes up, the thought is usually the same: I can figure it out. It's not worth paying someone for this. I'll save that money. At first glance, that sounds like a smart decision. After all, who wouldn't want to solve a problem while spending less? The problem is that some situations become far more expensive simply because we wait too long to ask someone who actually knows how to solve them. Think about someone who notices a small issue with their car but decides to wait a few more months before taking it to a mechanic. Or someone who ignores a plumbing leak because they believe they can fix it themselves over the weekend. Or someone who keeps putting off talking to an accountant because they think they can figure out all the paperwork on their own. The same thing happens with an attorney, with a financial planner, with almost any professional whose job is to keep a small problem from turning into a much bigger one. In an effort to save money today, many people end up giving the problem time to grow. And by the time they finally ask for help, fixing the situation costs far more than it would have in the beginning. The interesting part is that nobody makes these decisions because they want to lose money. Quite the opposite. The intention is always to save. And maybe that's exactly what connects every example we've talked about so far. The person who bought something just because it was on sale wanted to save money. The person who bought in bulk to get a lower price per item wanted to save money. The person who chose the cheapest option without considering the long-term costs wanted to save money. The person who cut expenses in the very areas designed to reduce risk also wanted to save money. And the person who tries to handle everything alone before asking for professional help is trying to do exactly the same thing. None of these decisions come from irresponsibility. They all come from a genuine desire to manage money more wisely. The problem is that good intentions don't always produce good results. When your only goal is to spend less today, it becomes incredibly easy to make decisions that seem smart in the present, but end up costing far more in the future. And that's exactly where a much more important question appears, one that's far more valuable than simply figuring out where to save money. That question is, how can you tell the difference between a truly smart way to save money and one that only looks smart? Surprisingly, the answer to that question is another very simple question that can help you avoid almost every mistake we've covered so far. And before you try to save money on anything, it may be the most important question you can ever ask yourself. Because after everything we've covered today, there's one important thing that needs to be absolutely clear. The problem was never saving money. The real problem is evaluating a decision only by the amount of money it allows you to keep today, because that's exactly what was behind every example in this video. In none of them did the loss happen because someone wanted to waste money. It happened because the analysis ended too soon. That's why there's one incredibly simple question that can completely change the way you make financial decisions from now on. Before you think about making any decision that seems like a good way to save money, ask yourself, does this actually reduce the total cost of this decision? Or is it simply delaying, increasing, or shifting that cost into the future? It sounds like a simple question, but it completely changes the way you think about money because it forces you to look beyond the price tag, beyond the discount, beyond the monthly payment, beyond the immediate feeling that you got a great deal. That's exactly the question that was missing when you probably made many of the choices we've talked about throughout this video, believing you were making smart financial decisions, when in reality, you weren't. Do you see how a single question can make sense of every one of these situations? That's because people who focus only on price tend to make short-term decisions, but people who learn to look at the total cost almost always make much smarter ones. From that moment on, the question stops being, how much will I save today? And becomes, how much is this decision really going to cost me by the time the whole story is over? That shift may seem small, but it completely changes the direction of your financial financial decisions. Because very often, the best financial decision isn't the one that requires the smallest payment today. It's the one that helps you spend less, not just today, but throughout the entire journey. Sometimes that even means paying a little more upfront, choosing a better product, hiring someone who's qualified, fixing a problem before it gets bigger, or simply deciding not to buy something that looked like a great opportunity. But it's exactly this ability to look beyond the present that separates people who simply react to prices from those who truly know how to manage money. And maybe that's the biggest lesson in this entire video. Saving money was never just about spending less. It has always been about making decisions that leave more money in your pocket over time. And that leads to a much bigger reflection. You begin asking yourself, what kind of decision makes my money work for me, instead of creating new expenses for my future? At the end of the day, financially intelligent people don't succeed because they never waste money. They succeed because they've learned how to tell the difference between a good decision and a decision that only looks good. And this might be the most valuable financial skill of all, because money that's lost can sometimes be earned back, but decisions made on autopilot tend to repeat themselves for years without us even noticing. And that's exactly where most financial mistakes keep happening, not because of a lack of knowledge, but because of a lack of awareness at the moment of choice. If during this video you realize that you've already fallen into some of these patterns, let me know in the comments which one surprised you the most. Your experience might help other people avoid the same mistake. And if you enjoy this kind of content that goes beyond surface level advice and shows you how to make smarter financial decisions in everyday life, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every week you'll find videos here that can genuinely change the way you handle money.